Good evening. My name's Nicholas Parker, and I am sometimes known as Moomer, which means I'm a boomer who thinks he or she is behaving like a millennial. It's great to be the last speaker because it's given me a chance to rewrite my entire presentation and to reflect on my cab ride from Vancouver Airport into Vancouver yesterday before I came up here. And I'm always curious, as a first-generation Canadian myself, about where we all come from and how we've come to be here. So this cab driver, but it's a delicate conversation sometimes because you sometimes cause offense. So you think by asking questions, people feel that you think they don't belong here. So I delicately said to this cab driver who didn't have a Canadian accent, I said, "Oh, so have you lived here all your life?" And the cab driver went quiet, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've blown it again. And finally looked at me in the rearview mirror and said, "No, not yet." So this person clearly has a long-term perspective, and this is one I want to share with you, because my topic of my talk in the next few minutes is Nextech, the ultimate and necessary innovation revolution, how we can create an intelligence-based love economy. Now let me just back up a second here and tell you where I've come from. I'm actually, other than being called Moomer, I'm sometimes called Mr. Cleantech, because I coined the term Cleantech 15 years ago to make a distinction between cleanup technology, which is what we really had in the environmental industry, to a new paradigm of how we could design out pollution and things we didn't want. And at the time of coining this term, I didn't realize that 12 years, 15 years later, I'd be standing here telling you that clean tech, almost within 3 years, became the largest category of venture capital investment in the US. And a decade or so later, we've seen $120 billion invested by venture capitalists in innovation startups. However, we're not getting where we need to go. And probably like me, you were completely dialed in to the World Geological Congress in Cape Town this summer, which was competing with the Rio Olympics for our attention. So on the off chance that two of you didn't pay attention to what was going on in Cape Town, let me summarize, because they made an announcement that we've been waiting to make for 12,000 years, which is that we're now officially, since the 1950s, according to the world's geologists, into the Anthropocene era. Now that term has already been referenced by previous speakers, but what does this really mean? It means that now we humans are the defining force of nature. And that's quite remarkable, given that we've only been around for 10,000 years, and we've come a long way, and we can now find planets that are, hundreds of millions of light years away. But it also means that we arrived at the party at 5 minutes to midnight, and we've already trashed the joint. Oh, we have to come and see the kinds of things that have already been shared by previous speakers is not as things that are great and cool and nice and wow, but as absolutely profound. We are in uncharted territory. And many of us know the data around climate change, and we're aware of the scale and the magnitude of what's coming at us at warp speed. But we're not necessarily aware of the full range of things that are happening. For example, how many of us here are aware that 83% of the elephants in Africa were wiped out in the last 10 years? How many of us are aware that by 2040 or 2050, there'll be more plastic in the ocean by weight than there will be fish? The scale of what we've got to contend with. And part of the challenge is the way we think about things. So Nextech is about what is next and what the nexus is between nature, new media, and neurobiology. So bear with me, because I'm going to have to go through this rather quickly in order to make my point here. So nature, we know we're on the eve of an ecological crisis. In fact, the crisis is already here. But it's not just the environmental dimension, it's our violence. So for thousands of years, if my club was bigger than yours, I got what I wanted. But today, where chemical weapons, nuclear weapons are increasingly dispersed around the world with people we really wouldn't want to have the finger on the trigger with, including south of the border, we have to learn that we can't fight anymore. We physically cannot do this. And we're a generation away, maybe 2 generations away at best, from having a catastrophic event. So we absolutely have to change, and we have to change now. Fortunately, nature is also a source of inspiration, as we've already heard from other speakers. Whether we call it biomimicry, or whether we call it syntropy, whether we call it any number of terms that are available to us, aquaponics, the circular economy, and by the way, I spend about 1/3 of my time in China, and the current 13th five-year plan is based on the notion of the circular economy. So, again, we have to shift our perspectives on what's happening. We need systems design, and we also need to tap into traditional knowledge. And thank goodness, First Nations and Aboriginal peoples in Canada and around the world are holding the ring for the rest of us while we catch up with what they already know. So, we also have these remarkable tools, new media. When I was a young person, I remember playing with a telex machine. I remember cassettes, 8-track. And now we have the world of the internet, which is also enabling all kinds of other things to happen. Big data. Big data is the microscope of the 21st century. The microscope enabled us to see biology, and we know the results of that. Now we have big data, which enables us to see things that heretofore were invisible to us, and we can see patterns, sometimes quite beautifully and artistically. We also have the tools to collaborate and to cooperate in ways that we never imagined were possible. We have citizen science. We have companies like Local Motors that involve 4,000 people around the world in designing a new kind of automobile that drives for something like 300 to 400 miles before it needs to have gasoline again, or it'll be eclipsed by the next generation of cars that don't even require gasoline. We have the sharing economy. I was fortunate enough to be an angel investor in a company called Zipcar about a decade ago. They couldn't raise a nickel in Silicon Valley, and now we have Uber, the largest taxi company in the world that doesn't own any taxis, Facebook, the largest content provider that doesn't produce any content, and Airbnb, the world's largest hotel chain that doesn't own any hotels. The world has changed, and we can collaborate, whether it's through crowdfunding and crowdsourcing ideas. We have these tools. So if we have the tools and we have an existential crisis, why does it seem that most of the time doing the right thing and the principled thing means you're swimming upstream? Why is it so difficult? Why do we constantly have to argue with people about what is going on? And as Einstein said, and as the Talmud said, the sacred Jewish text, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. So clearly we have to change. Einstein said it as well. We can't solve problems with the same way of thinking, and so on and so forth. And we're now learning through neuroscience, which I would argue is the most profound area of human inquiry, that we have plasticity, that we're not hardwired into one way of being, that we can change how we perceive things, and that the inner world, the mind, maps the outer world. So we need mindsight, along with insight, that will inspire us to think differently. And for example, we now see a world where wealth creation doesn't necessarily require job creation. So Google is worth $400 billion, but only employs 25,000 people. Whereas Renault in France is worth $4 billion in the capital market, but employs 250,000 people. Well, this worries the heck out of finance and economic ministers who go, do we invest and support metal bashers, or do we go for the high-tech stuff? This is a false dilemma. Haven't we wanted all through our history to be able to create wealth without having to work? The future's arrived. Why can't we have a guaranteed minimum income so that we can focus our time on elder care and reconciliation and on environmental restoration and startups and social enterprise areas and all kinds of things that we want to do? Because we have an attitude that we'll all be lazy and watch Netflix. And we probably would for 6 months, and then we'll go do something. So I think we need to take the science of neuroscience, which some would call mindfulness, but in a scientific wrapping, and rethink who we are, because we have shown through our history that we've been able to make leaps of consciousness. We've been able to go to the next stage of the journey. And now the future's arrived. So here we are as Canadians, given by the Creator all the human and natural resources one could ever need and want. And if we can't do it, who the heck can? This can be exportable excellence. And so if I capture the spirit of my predecessors, what I would try and say is that if we can reconcile ourselves to this reality, then we can match our needs to what it needs to be done, and we can yield the outcomes that will be worth bragging about. Thank you very much.